Hi, and welcome back. Before we delve into the coming chapters on theories of juvenile delinquency and how those theories are tested, we need to understand some about social science research methods. If you've already had your methods and stats courses, this will be a good review for you. If you haven't, not to worry. I'll get you up to speed enough so that you can speak intelligibly as we study the next several chapters. Let's start with the scientific method. First and foremost, you must have a hypothesis, which is the thing you want to test. You are carefully defining a cause and effect. Then you're going to collect data to measure the cause and effect. You analyze the data to see if it supports or refutes your hypothesis. If it does, great. You have just contributed another piece to overarching theory, such as theories we're going to study in upcoming chapters. If your data analysis does not support your hypothesis, that's also valuable because it shows that there may be holes in the overarching theory, or at least room for additional questions. Something that is key to this process, and this is extremely important to know, no theory can ever be proven. There's no such thing in the scientific method as a theory that is completely and 100% proven. It can be supported beyond a shadow of a doubt, that's for sure, but never proven 100%. Now, there's another distinction here when looking at your hypothesis, and that's the type of reasoning you're using. Deductive reasoning is what I just described. You have a hypothesis, then you collect empirical data to test it, to support it, or to refute it. But there is also inductive reasoning, which is when you peruse empirical data looking for patterns, and then you work those patterns into a hypothesis. How do we collect empirical data? There are two types of empirical data, qualitative data and quantitative data. Qualitative data collection includes things like field research, observations, interviews, and historical comparative research. Quantitative data collection includes things like experiments, surveys, content analysis, and unobtrusive research, i.e., analyzing existing data sets like those we've discussed previously, the Uniform Crime Report, the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System, and so on. Now, when you build your hypothesis, there are four parts that you need to think about. First, what is it that you want to explain? Second, what do you believe is the cause? Third, what is the mechanism between the cause and the effect? And fourth, under what conditions will this cause and effect occur? So, for example, what do you want to explain? Perhaps it's a specific type of delinquency behavior or changes in delinquency over time or differences in delinquency among groups of juveniles. When you measure one of these, the measurement of it is called your dependent variable. Then, what do you think is the cause of what you are trying to explain? What factor or factors have an effect on the dependent variable causing it to occur? Perhaps it's growing up in an abusive home, or having no after-school programs, or changes in physiological factors, maturation, and so on. These are called independent variables, and the relationship you're testing is the effect of the independent variables on the dependent variable. Next, what is the mechanism between the cause and the effect? This is the how question. How does the independent variable contribute to changes in the dependent variable? For example, perhaps child abuse angers the child, causing them to lash out at others. Perhaps after-school activities foster self-esteem and keep kids off the streets, and so on. And then lastly, under what conditions will this cause and effect occur? For example, not all abused children commit acts of delinquency. What is it about some abused children that cause them to do so? Perhaps there are differences in some of those socio-demographic variables we talked about earlier, such as socioeconomic status. Perhaps counseling programs, or a lack of them, can be mitigating factors in delinquent behavior. When you measure one of these concepts, the measurement is often, but not always, called a conditioning variable. Okay, what do we look for when we test a hypothesis via data analysis? First things first, is there a relationship between the independent and dependent variables? In other words, do both tend to occur at the same point in time? If the two variables are related, what is the likelihood that the relationship is simply due to chance? This could be because of sampling error. For example, you choose to study a group that does not represent the population you want to study as a whole. Secondly, what is the likelihood that the relationship is due to a third variable that causes both? This is called a spurious relationship. A somewhat famous example of this is that in areas of the U.S. where there are more storks, there are also more babies. Does this mean that the storks are bringing more babies? No. It actually turns out that storks tend to live in more rural areas of the country, and for reasons you can study in a demography course, we also know that families who live in rural areas tend to have larger families. There is a spurious relationship here. The degree of ruralness causes changes in both the independent and dependent variables. Next, we have to look at the correct causal order, i.e., does the cause come before the effect? There could be a reciprocal effect. For example, associating with delinquent peers causes delinquent behavior, but delinquent behavior can also cause one to associate with delinquent peers. These different kinds of uh-ohs in our analyses can usually be accounted for with the correct data analysis. For instance, conditioning variables help to control for spurious relationships. Okay, lastly, let's look at the difference between quantitative and qualitative data. Generally speaking, we're talking about the difference between numbers and words. Quantitative data is generally just numbers. For example, please rate your overall level of satisfaction with the bachelor's degree program in sociology on a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 equals completely dissatisfied and 10 equals completely satisfied. We are quantifying people's experience with the sociology bachelor's degree program. There's a lot more to read about quantitative data collection in Chapter 5, so be sure you check out those examples and descriptions. Qualitative data is generally words. That is, words used to describe what is happening in a given situation. This includes, for example, field research such as observations, participant observations, interviews, focus groups, portfolios, and journals. The key to qualitative research is not to be quantitative. In other words, don't try to quantify everything that you collect. Don't try to turn it all into numbers and percentages. Instead, focus on description and analysis of the data, the words that you collect. As I said, there's a lot more to understand about testing theories, so be sure to read Chapter 5 for more and for more examples of each. And I'll see you online.